Hiraku awakens earlier after dreaming of his demise in his world. He steps outside and greets everyone, mentioning that he never anticipated living such a dreamlike existence. As a spirit, Hiraku confronts the deity that oversees the world. The deity observes that he lived for 39 years, being betrayed by others and subsequently succumbing to a terminal illness. The deity resolves to offer him a second opportunity with a body that will not suffer from sickness, and expresses a desire to apologize, asking him if he has any wishes that could also be fulfilled. Hiraku expresses his desire to try his hand at farming. It receives permission from the agriculture deity to grant Hiraku the power of the supreme farming tool. Hiraku finds himself waking up in a forest and feels joyful to be healthy and to be able to move once more. He decides to embark on his farming journey there, contemplating how to utilize the supreme farming tool. The tool magically appears in his grasp, and Hiraku begins digging, noticing that he feels no fatigue whatsoever. He appreciates the softness of the soil and realizes he can cultivate excellent vegetables there. Hiraku then understands he must prioritize food and water and sets off to explore. He spots a large tree and decides to make it a point of reference and use it as a camp. He searches for a river but cannot locate any source of water. Hiraku then opts to dig in hopes of finding underground water. He summons his tool, which transforms into a shovel, and shortly after starting to dig, he discovers water. While preparing the area around the tree, Hiraku seeks food but finds nothing. Hiraku then notices a smaller tree that will eventually obstruct him and opts to fell it now. He summons his tool as an axe and narrowly avoids being crushed by the tree as he manages to cut it down with a single blow. He changes his tool into a hatchet and then slices the tree into smaller pieces. Before he realizes it, dusk is approaching, and he turns his tool into a magnifying glass. But the sun sets. With no method to ignite a fire, he carves a hollow into the large tree and conceals himself inside. Hiraku fashions some plates and cups. He realizes the moon gives sufficient light for him to see, but then observes that there are two moons, and surmises he must be in another world. In the morning, Hiraku keeps clearing the area around the large tree and cuts down additional trees. He feels it's time to find something to eat, and at that moment a huge monster rabbit attacks him, which Hiraku manages to kill with a single swing of his tool. After consuming it, he decides to construct a toilet and digs a sizable hole with an entrance and uses a tree trunk as a seat. Because he couldn't relax, he ends up building a small cabin around the toilet seat. Hiraku then begins cultivating the land and envisions what he could grow. Once he finishes, he realizes he doesn't have any seeds to plant anything. The next morning, he is astonished to notice that some plants have already begun to sprout, and he wonders if it is because of the tool. He resolves to build a wall and a ditch around the fields to protect them from the rabbits and other creatures. It takes him several days to finish. The plants grow more quickly, and Hiraku hopes that they are something edible and not just decorative flowers. Hiraku then constructs a hut, but since he struggles to lift the wood up, he digs inside of it to allow himself more vertical space. One day, he spots two dogs outside. As they appear a little rough and non-aggressive, he invites them in and offers them some meat from a boar he has just slain. He observes that one of them is pregnant, and after they have eaten, she begins experiencing birth pains. Hiraku realizes she is about to give birth and contemplates what actions to take. He ultimately decides to let them stay in his house while he retreats back to the tree hole for the night. In the morning, he checks on the dogs and notices that the female has given birth to 4 puppies. He provides them with more meat to celebrate this occasion. Hiraku thought the dogs would leave afterward, but they choose to stay. As they enjoy the hut, Hiraku decides to build himself a new home. Hiraku eventually grows some tomatoes and takes pleasure in them. The dogs go hunting and safeguard the premises for Hiraku. Hiraku wishes to construct a storehouse, cultivate more vegetables, and many other things. God chooses to check on Hiraku to see how he is doing, since he feels guilty for giving him a life suited for a sinner. During his observation, he discovers that he placed Hiraku in a perilous forest known as the Forest of Death, and recognizes that he has made another error. Hiraku realizes that while he is preparing the soil for farming, if he desires to plant a particular crop, that crop magically begins to grow. Hiraku is content with his life and acknowledges that it is thanks to the gods who granted it to him. He creates some statues of the 2 gods to express his gratitude. Hiraku decides to experiment with planting some fruits. As they grow, he enjoys playing with the dogs, recognizing that he would feel much lonelier without them. Since the dogs also assist him in navigating back to his camp, Hiraku is able to venture further into the forest and ultimately discovers a river. He plans to create a tunnel to bring water to his site, and first decides to construct a toilet near the river. Hiraku figures out that if he transforms his tool into a wheelbarrow, he can maneuver with it without tiring. He also expands his crop fields by adding more vegetables. He cultivates soybeans and wishes to consume them, but he lacks salt. As time goes by, the weather begins to turn cold. Observing snow on the mountains, Hiraku ponders how frigid it gets here. He resolves to start getting ready for winter by gathering food and firewood. A giant spider appears. However, it is friendly and makes a handkerchief for Hiraku. The spider then chooses to inhabit the large tree and enjoys eating potatoes. In return, the spider crafts him clothing using the animal pelts that Hiraku provides. With the addition of cloth, Hiraku feels more civilized, as he now possesses a comfortable bed, curtains, and clothes. Hiraku decides to name the spider Zabuton. The winter begins. Zabuton no longer descends from the tree, and Hiraku suspects he is hibernating. Hiraku experiences a sense of loneliness, but eventually summer arrives. The small dogs have grown up, and one day they depart, but they quickly come back along with companions. Shortly after, Zabuton appears as well and brings children with him. With more mouths to feed now, Hiraku opts to enlarge his crops once again. Zabuton sounds the alarm, and Kuro guides Hiraku into the forest. Kuro leads him to a little girl who is unclothed and caught in spider webs. The dogs and spiders are cautious of her, but when she calls for help, Hiraku chooses to assist her. As he approaches, she leaps and bites his neck, subsequently transforming into a young woman. Hiraku questions whether she is a monster. The dogs then assault her, and as they strike her, she reverts to a small girl once more. Hiraku ponders whether she is their adversary since she drank his blood, but the girl clarifies she isn't and needed to do that to regain her strength. As she expended too much energy, she cannot sustain her adult form or clothing. Hiraku wonders why the dogs attacked them, and she states she wished to take one of them. Feeling sorry for her, Hiraku permits her to take more of his blood so that she can recuperate. Hiraku brings her to his home. The girl is astonished to find a crop field within the forest, particularly with so many new crops. Hiraku offers her a tomato, which she enjoys and expresses interest in trying additional crops as well. The girl shares that her name is Rurushi, a vampire, and is thrilled to sample a variety of new vegetables. Ru explains that she is working on medical research and escaped after getting into a conflict with some nobles who attempted to seize her research. Since they continued to pursue her and she learned about this forest, she chose to hide here temporarily until things settled down, while also hoping to discover new plants to study. She is amazed that Hiraku is residing in such a perilous forest and has even tamed the creatures. He is also utilizing some unusual magic that enables him to create various tools, which excites her even further. Hiraku understands how exceptional his opportunity is, since this is the first individual he has encountered. Since it might take longer to find someone else, Hiraku chooses to ask Ru to remain and live with him. Ru attempts to clarify that there are people pursuing her and that she is a vampire, but Hiraku remains indifferent. Hiraku articulates that he came here to be alone as he struggles with social interactions, but now he recognizes that he does not wish to be solitary and is uncertain about how much more he can endure. Ru consents, explaining that she does not actually have a place to go, even though she feels shy about his suggestion. The following morning, Ru appears a bit younger. Hiraku is intrigued, and she clarifies that in this state, he will refrain from making physical contact with her, to which Hiraku concurs. Hiraku states his next intention is to cultivate some sweet potatoes. He also mentions that Ru is the first villager he has encountered. Kuro disputes this, prompting Hiraku to amend his statement, saying she is more like the 30th villager. Ru inquires if Hiraku can cultivate some medicinal herbs, and Hiraku agrees to give it a shot. Ru mentions they need to find the appropriate seeds somehow, but Hiraku insists that he does not require seeds. Using magic, Ru assists by placing lights in the toilet and other areas. Hiraku had nearly lost hope in locating salt, but Ru clarifies that one of the soil layers contains mostly salt and is astonished he didn't notice while performing all that digging. Hiraku inspects his fruit garden, but presumes it requires more time for them to mature than the vegetables. Zabuton sounds the alarm, and Hiraku is puzzled about what is happening. He accompanies Ru to investigate, only to discover another girl being ensnared by the spiders and dogs. She apologizes for attacking them and requests Hiraku's assistance. As he frees her, she utilizes magic to heal herself. She then spots Ru and realizes she was concealing herself in the forest and desires to capture her, but the dogs launch an attack on her once more. Hiraku brings the girl and Ru back to his home. Ru clarifies she was in a similar predicament. The dogs are quite merciless, and magic does not really impact them, as they can also evade spells. The girl inquires about who Hiraku is, and, blushing, Ru reveals that he is her husband. The girl then introduces herself as Tia, an angel. Hiraku speculates that she serves God, but Ru explains that angels are a race of warriors who possess more muscle than intelligence. Hiraku questions why Tia is pursuing Ru, and Tia explains that Rue has a bounty due to the destruction she caused in the town. Rue is perpetually researching odd medicines and concoctions, and whenever something irritates her, she starts exploding things. Rue states that this occurrence only happened once because the nobles were excessively demanding and needed to learn a lesson, and it was an accident, finally admitting she went a bit overboard. She also mentions that Tia is somewhat stronger than her, which is the reason she fled into the forest. Tia is astonished that Rue is acknowledging her vulnerabilities, and Rue explains it's because she understands how weak she is after confronting the dogs. Rue invites Tia to live with them, believing she will enjoy it. Tia consents, and Rue takes her on a tour to showcase the crops. They spend the day gathering some vegetables, and Hiraku offers Tia some to taste, which she ultimately enjoys. After several days, Tia inquires with Hiraku about the possibility of growing additional strawberries. Hiraku clarifies that they can, but even with an expansion, they will struggle to keep up with the harvesting of everything. Tia acknowledges that they could indeed benefit from extra assistance. Hiraku further observes that even if they successfully harvest everything, they might not be able to consume it all. Hiraku notices that the dog family has expanded significantly. Soon, they will mature and seek out partners for themselves. Rue realizes this means their numbers will increase even further, prompting Hiraku to recognize that the hut he built for them won't suffice in size. Hiraku consequently resolves to construct a dog area adjacent to the orchard. Hiraku still has not named the new pups, as there are too many, making it difficult for him to come up with names. Hiraku then observes Zabuton's children departing, although some choose to remain. Tia informs Hiraku that she will be away for some time and takes flight. A few days later, Tia comes back accompanied by a group of high elf girls. They arrived at Tia's suggestion and expressed their desire to reside here. Tia mentions they have a sorrowful backstory. They formerly lived in a northern village, but most of their kin were annihilated when they became involved in the humans' war. Their race has been dispersed, and they have been traversing the land in search of a new home ever since. Rue also proposes they take the girls, having heard that high elves are a gifted race. She speculates they are still quite young, to which Leah confirms that she is the oldest at just over 400 years, while Lise is the youngest at just over 300 years old. Tia and Rue advocate strongly, and Hiraku consents, provided that they can coexist peacefully with the other inhabitants. Leah inquires about who the roommates are, and Rue introduces Zabuton and the dogs, leading the girls to faint. As the elves desired to reside together, Hiraku made the decision to construct one large house for them. The elves possess greater knowledge regarding construction, and Hiraku chooses to adhere to their instructions while they build the house, primarily digging and supplying lumber to them. After a span of 10 days, the house is finished. It is quite spacious, and both Rue and Tia express their admiration. Hiraku feels envious and contemplates rebuilding his hut. The elves' house features a large living room where they can all convene and dine. On either side of the living room, there are storage rooms. The second floor consists of individual rooms for them. Hiraku is taken aback to discover that the elves also consume meat and utilize fire. His perception of elves has been that they awaken with the sunrise and retire to sleep when the sun sets. They are in harmony with nature, cherish trees, primarily eat berries, and refrain from wearing any metal. Lie advises Hiraku not to undervalue the forest, as attempting to live that way would lead to swift demise. Lie clarifies that they intend to engage in some mining and blacksmithing activities. Hiraku is astonished, as in his perspective, that was the domain of dwarves. Shortly thereafter, they assemble a furnace and begin manufacturing items. With a metal pan in hand, Hiraku feels a surge of excitement, sensing that his civilization is progressing, and speculates that the elves may be capable of anything. Lie points out that there are certain things they cannot accomplish, such as settling down and reproducing. Hiraku remarks that they have already accomplished one of those things, but chooses to remain silent about the second, given their expressions and smiles directed at him. The elves had noticed a wheat field, and Hiraku explains that they have harvested it and converted it into flour. Lee then inquires whether they can make some bread, revealing that they possess a jar with yeast, and Hiraku readily agrees. While relishing the bread, Hiraku contemplates the need to expand the wheat field. However, at that moment, he realizes something and asks Rue if this land belongs to anyone. Rue clarifies that no one owns the forest, although it is technically under the dominion of the Demon Lord. Upon hearing that, Hiraku begins to feel anxious and wonders if the Demon Lord will oppose it, but Rue reassures him that, since he constructed this himself, the land rightfully belongs to him. Tia, Rue, and Leah are astonished by Hiraku, as he has not only tamed the Inferno Wolves, but also a demon spider. The crops are remarkable as well, and Leah muses whether the soil here is truly that rich for them to thrive so well. However, it is surprising how he is unaware of the world surrounding him. He had an incorrect notion of what elves were and did not know anything about angels, leading the girls to conclude that it is more than just a gap in knowledge. Meanwhile, Hiraku is inside his hut, crafting a wooden cup. He realizes that he hasn't made progress on his waterway for some time and wonders if the girls might assist him. Zabuton demonstrates to Hiraku that it has caught a queen bee. Since it does not intend to consume the bee and the bee poses no threat, Hiraku resolves to construct a small home for the bee to create a nest with the hope that he can collect some honey. Tia, who is passing by, is curious about what Hiraku is doing but feels apprehensive about the hive and apologizes for interrupting him. Following that, Hiraku digs a sizable hole, planning to use it as a reservoir, and explains to Leah that he intends to draw water from the river. Leah queries how much progress he has made on his waterway, but upon learning that he has just begun, she suggests they should first decide what material to use for its construction. Hiraku envisions using stone, but Leah clarifies that it will be difficult to obtain. Hiraku then considers wood, but Leah points out that because of the length, they will have to join many pieces, leading to excess leakage. Hiraku eventually opts to use dirt and, utilizing the almighty tool, he compresses it, transforming it into something solid and sturdy like concrete. Hiraku allows the elves to manage the foundation of the waterway, while he concentrates on sealing the seams and reinforcing the foundation. Hiraku also succeeds in catching some fish. Tia and Ru identify the fish as quite ferocious ones from the Forest of Death and question whether it is safe to consume them. They make Hiraku try them first and will only eat afterward, but ultimately find them delicious. Hiraku captures additional fish and preserves them with salt. Hiraku is astonished that he has been able to grow some rice, but now that he has easy access to water, Hiraku decides to create a rice paddy. After he excavates the area and floods it, the girls speculate whether he means to create a lake and grow fish in it. Hiraku refutes this and asks them to assist him in planting some rice. The rice fields flourish rapidly, and Hiraku teaches the girls how to harvest them. After drying the rice, he utilizes the almighty tool to craft an ancient thresher and then a sieve to remove the leaves and plant debris. He then employs a mortar to separate the husk from the rice and a pestle to polish the rice. The girls observe that it is quite a bit of work and wonder if they can finally eat, but Hiraku explains they must first cook it and shows them how to do so. Ultimately, Hiraku shapes the rice into rice balls. The girls enjoy the rice balls so much that they consume all of them, leaving only a single grain of rice for Hiraku. The girls can clean themselves with magic, but since Hiraku cannot do so, he opts to construct a bath. The girls mention they can wash in the river, but Hiraku clarifies the advantages of having a bath and that they can bathe in winter as well without freezing. The girls assist him, and the progress on the bath is going smoothly. However, Hiraku then realizes and ponders if it is acceptable to discharge the wastewater back into the river. Tia proposes that they utilize slimes since they will consume the waste products and purify the water. Tia brings some slimes, and Hiraku builds a purification pool for them. Tia points out they can also place them into the toilets, but Hiraku is uncertain if he wants to do his business over a slime's head. Hiraku discovers some mushrooms growing on his wood logs, and not knowing which ones are poisonous and which are safe, he wonders if he can cultivate some mushrooms himself and uses the mighty tool to strike the wood, hoping for shiitake, shimeji, and other mushrooms. In the evening, Hiraku teaches the girls how to use the bath. He explains that once they undress, they should clean themselves in the washing area. Leah interrupts him and says it would be simpler if he demonstrates. Hiraku consents and shows them the process. As he enters the bath, he feels overwhelming joy. The girls then do not hesitate and begin following the steps to join him. Hiraku mentions he will leave to let them enjoy it and will use it afterward, but the girls say they can bathe together, as that way they won't have to heat up water again. Surrounded by the girls, Hiraku feels he cannot relax. The following day, Hiraku notices that he has grown some mushrooms. He then hears the dogs and sees that they have discovered 5 new elves and brought them in. As the girls introduce themselves, Hiraku realizes they all start with La, indicating they must be related. Leah explains that she recognizes them and that they used to live in the same village, but they last saw each other 200 years ago. Hiraku agrees that they can live there as well, and Leah expresses her desire to start building them a house. She also mentions that they can seize the opportunity to make some improvements to Hiraku's house. Kuro observes that the number of females in Hiraku's group has risen. Kuro shares that he had lived in solitude in the forest and was never bested in combat by another male. He had planned to live as he wished, but one day he encountered a female who ultimately overpowered him. From that moment, the two began to travel together. The female eventually became pregnant, and Kuro was content with the prospect of having a family. But they encountered a grappler bear, the ruler of this forest. The bear defeated them, but chose not to eat them. Injured, the two were unable to hunt for sustenance. They became so weakened that their usual prey evaded them, and ultimately they arrived at the heart of the forest, a place even the grappler bear steers clear of. There, they discovered a solitary human male. Typically, humans conceal themselves in the forest and refrain from lingering in one location for an extended period. Kuro pondered how such a frail human could survive independently, but then he sensed the boundless power emanating from the extraordinary tool. Kuro believed this marked their end and accepted it. However, Hiraku generously shared his food and tended to their needs. Kuro and his wife then resolved that Hiraku would be their master. Kuro's sole worry is that Hiraku does not seem to grasp that Kuro is a fearsome creature known as the Inferno Wolf. Kuro is confident everything will be all right and is grateful for having met Hiraku. Hiraku's new home is finally completed. The girls then take him on a tour of the house and his bedroom. Hiraku notices a room with a bolt lock and is curious about its contents, but upon opening it and spotting a bed for two, he quickly closes the door and pretends he didn't see it. The following day, Hiraku chooses to prepare a dish he hasn't tried making before: curry. Hiraku brings the girl to an area of his crops where they observe many unfamiliar plants, and he explains that some of them are varieties that won't thrive in regions with snowfall, but due to the miraculous tool, he can cultivate them here. He goes on to gather spices for the curry, starting with some cumin. Next, he collects some turmeric and explains that this ingredient provides the curry its color. Afterward, he gathers coriander and mentions they need to grind the seeds into powder. He also picks some cilantro leaves, whose scent repels the dogs. The girls notice and suggest it might be useful to research the plant. Hiraku then continues to collect black pepper and cayenne peppers. Having collected all the spices, Hiraku moves on to the next step, but sees that only Leah is present, who tells him that Ru and Tia are preoccupied with some research on creating a powerful protection talisman. Hiraku then begins cooking, heating the rapeseed oil they extracted and adding the rabbit meat. While that cooks, he grinds all the spices into powder, excluding the cumin. When the meat develops some color, he removes it to prevent overcooking and cooks the cumin with the leftover bits and juices from the meat. Following that, he adds diced onions, ginger, and garlic. Next, he incorporates tomatoes and continues sautéing everything. When it turns into a paste, he adds the spices and some salt. After cooking it for a short while, he then introduces the meat and boiled soybeans along with some water. As he allows it to cook, Hiraku feels he has forgotten something and then remembers it's naan. Hiraku clarifies that the recipe is the same as making regular bread until the point they allow it to rise, where they will roll the dough with a rolling pin. The girls return just as Hiraku finishes cooking, and they all sit down to eat. He explains how to enjoy the naan with the curry, and the girls end up savoring it and decide to have a second serving. Observing them, Hiraku hopes they will leave some for him as well. Ru and Tia offer some curry to the dogs, but upon catching a whiff, the dogs flee. With winter approaching, Hiraku gets ready and collects firewood. He understands that Zabuton will hibernate and asks him ahead of time to prepare some additional blankets. Hiraku has Ru and Tia cure some meat by smoking and drying it, particularly since the dogs won't be able to hunt much during winter. Hiraku is devising a method to preserve vegetables and constructs a two-tiered box. He intends to place the vegetables on the upper tier and cover them with a blanket and snow, while any snow that collects will gather on the lower tier to keep the vegetables dry. Observing the girls using magic, Hiraku wished he could also use it, but he's glad they are around since they've helped him considerably, as he can only manage gardening and cooking. Ru states that he is the remarkable one because no one has ever lived that long in this forest. When winter arrives, they spend more time indoors, and Hiraku decides to create some board games like Reversi, chess, and a mahjong set. He explains the Reversi game, noting that it concludes when the board is full, with the winner being the one who has more pieces of his color. Ru finds the game rules straightforward and questions if it will be enjoyable, but Tia asserts that it allows for intricate strategies. Hiraku praises Tia for her insight, which irritates Ru, leading her to challenge Tia. As they play, Tia is definitely winning, but Ru overturns the board, pretending it was an accident. Ru suggests they restart since they don't recall where the pieces were, but Tia uses magic and restores the board to its original state. Ru flips it again, but Tia magically restores it once more. Hiraku checks on the other girls and notices Kuro advising where to move a piece. He then sees other dogs playing chess and is astonished that they not only grasp the rules, but also play the game. A sense of ominous energy emanates from them, and he concludes that he should never challenge the dogs to a match. Ru then approaches and decides to play with the dogs, confident that she cannot lose, but ultimately loses and refrains from flipping the table due to her fear of Kuro. Hiraku then engages in a mahjong game with Kuro, Tia, and Leah, convinced that Kuro shouldn't have learned the rules so quickly. Nevertheless, he loses significantly, finishing in last place, while Kuro emerges victorious. Feeling disheartened, Hiraku opts to create a mini bowling game. When Rue questions why they need to knock down the pins, he chooses to name them after some villains. As they engage in games each day, winter passes swiftly, and spring arrives. One morning, Zabuton notifies them. Hiraku then observes that something large is approaching from the sky. He conjectures it is a dragon, but Tia informs him it is a wyvern.